Picture this, it's the late 1970s, and the music world is buzzing with fresh sounds. Punk rock and new wave are taking over New York, with Blondie at the heart of the scene. Led by Debbie Harry and Chris Stein, Blondie was breaking boundaries with their edgy look and bold music. Across the Atlantic, however, another band had already taken the world by storm. ABBA, the Swedish pop sensation, was ruling the charts worldwide with catchy melodies, unforgettable choruses, and glamorous performances. They seemed to be everywhere and impossible to ignore. Debbie Harry and the rest of Blondie couldn't help but notice the unstoppable rise of ABBA. Even though Blondie and ABBA came from completely different musical worlds, Harry saw something special in ABBA's work. She respected them, even admired them, for what they had achieved in pop music. ABBA was no ordinary pop band. They were masters of melody and perfectionists in the studio. Their music was irresistible, Debbie once said, talking about hits like Dancing Queen and Mamma Mia for Blondie. ABBA was both an inspiration and a challenge, a band they couldn't help but admire, even if they wanted to stand apart. In New York, Blondie was helping define the punk rock and new wave movement, singing about nightlife, fashion, and raw emotions. ABBA, meanwhile, was delivering polished pop tunes about love, heartbreak, and hope. On the surface, these two bands seemed worlds apart. Yet for Debbie Harry, ABBA's music was hard to dismiss. ABBA's songs were catchy, elegant, and carefully crafted, filled with harmonies and emotion that made them more than just radio hits. Debbie Harry herself once said that ABBA was a pop band with a huge influence. Blondie might have been from the gritty punk scene, but they could appreciate the genius behind ABBA's music. Debbie was no stranger to catchy tunes and unforgettable hooks, and she recognized that ABBA had mastered these elements. For her, ABBA was like the Mount Everest of pop, a towering example of what it meant to create music that captured the world's attention. Blondie knew they couldn't directly compete with ABBA, but in their own way they looked up to the Swedish superstars. They wanted that same kind of success, even if it came from a different place. In songs like Heart of Glass and Call Me, Blondie began to explore more pop and disco sounds, blending them with their new wave style. Chris Stein, Blondie's guitarist, once mentioned that ABBA inspired them to aim for a cleaner sound. This wasn't typical of punk rock, but Blondie wasn't afraid to try new things. They started to focus more on production, adding harmonies and smooth sounds that were a nod to ABBA's polished style. For Debbie, ABBA was both a symbol of success and a bit of a challenge. She wanted Blondie to be seen as a serious band with its own unique sound, but also dreamed of achieving the kind of worldwide success ABBA had. "We wanted to surprise people like ABBA did," she said, and that ambition pushed Blondie to take risks with their music. As Blondie's fame grew, they managed to build their own legacy with songs like The Tide is High and Rapture. They became global stars, just like ABBA, and reached audiences far beyond New York's punk scene. Yet Debbie Harry still felt a desire to show that Blondie was different and that their music had its own edge. She admired ABBA, but at the same time she wanted to prove that Blondie could make a lasting mark in a way that was uniquely theirs. "ABBA was a band we couldn't ignore," she said later, admitting that their success motivated Blondie to work harder and reach higher. As the 70s shifted into the electric pulse of the 80s, both Blondie and ABBA found themselves at the height of fame, though their paths and sounds couldn't have been more different. ABBA had become true pop royalty, adored by millions for their perfect harmonies and radiant, feel-good anthems. Hits like Dancing Queen and Waterloo weren't just songs, they were iconic soundtracks of an era, loved worldwide for their ability to uplift and unite. On the other side, Blondie emerged from the gritty streets of New York, a band that thrived on rebellion and bold experimentation. With Debbie Harry's fierce charisma and hits like Heart of Glass and Call Me, Blondie rewrote the rules of alternative music, blending punk, new wave, and disco in ways no one else dared. And while ABBA's style was polished and precise, Blondie's music had an edgy rawness that connected with listeners seeking something different, something unpredictable. It was a contrast that went beyond sound, a clash of identities. ABBA's members performed with a kind of flawless showmanship, a brightness that felt almost larger than life. Blondie, on the other hand, embraced imperfection and pushed boundaries, diving into themes of nightlife, heartbreak, and urban struggles. Debbie Harry looked back on ABBA with admiration, knowing they had set the bar for pop music. And yet, she also knew Blondie's impact was in its courage to stand out and to explore the chaotic, darker edges of fame. As time passed, ABBA and Blondie each found their way into the history books. ABBA's songs became timeless classics, still played at celebrations, weddings, and parties, their joyful simplicity transcending generations. They defined pop music's brighter side, a kind of polished escapism that made life's problems feel distant, if only for a few minutes. Blondie's legacy, on the other hand, felt like a manifesto for individuality. They proved that punk and new wave didn't have to be underground and that even unconventional music could become mainstream without losing its identity. Debbie Harry knew ABBA's melodies would always have universal appeal, yet she was proud that Blondie had opened doors for bands that followed, showing them how to stay unique in an industry that preferred formula over originality. Today, both Blondie and ABBA are celebrated not just for their hits, but for the influence they left behind. ABBA's polished sound inspired countless pop stars to strive for perfection in melody and production, from Madonna to the Spice Girls and beyond. They had laid out a blueprint for global pop success, proving that music from a small European country could become a worldwide phenomenon. Meanwhile, Blondie's legacy lives on in the hearts of artists who cherish the spirit of independence. Bands like No Doubt, Garbage, and even Lady Gaga have cited Blondie as proof that commercial success and artistic authenticity can coexist. Debbie Harry's boldness and Blondie's fearless genre-blending approach continue to echo in the work of today's genre-defying artists. For Debbie Harry, looking back on ABBA was like gazing at a distant star alight that represented a different kind of fame, a contrasting vision of success. She respected how ABBA's music connected so effortlessly with listeners and admired how their harmonies could make even the simplest lyrics feel profound. But her respect wasn't free of competition. There was a part of her that saw ABBA as a standard she wanted to exceed, a challenge to be met. While Blondie never tried to imitate ABBA, they used their success as motivation, proof that reaching the world stage was possible. Debbie recognized that while Blondie's music might not have the same perfect pop appeal, it held an enduring power that ABBA's polished perfection could never quite capture. Years later, as both Blondie and ABBA enjoy their status as legends, the divisions that once set them apart seem almost irrelevant. Once upon a time, these two bands stood on opposite sides of the music world: Blondie, rebellious and raw, and ABBA, polished and pop-perfect. Blondie's songs captured the grit and thrill of New York's underground scene, while ABBA's shimmering harmonies provided the soundtrack for celebrations across continents. But now, decades later, those lines blur and a shared legacy emerges. Each band carved a different path to immortality, yet both left an undeniable impact that rewrote the rules of music. The journey for Blondie was one of constant reinvention. They thrived on defying expectations, blending genres like punk, disco, and new wave in ways no one had imagined. Blondie took risks, and sometimes the results were unexpected, even controversial. Heart of Glass shocked their punk fans with its disco beat, but it also broke barriers, pushing Blondie onto the mainstream stage without losing their edge. ABBA, by contrast, stayed committed to a clear vision. They perfected the art of catchy melodies and feel-good lyrics, creating songs that felt universally joyful and timeless. For Blondie, success meant breaking the mold, while for ABBA, it was about mastering it. Yet both approaches brought a new depth to pop music, challenging the idea of what a pop band could achieve. In their own ways, both bands offered something revolutionary. ABBA's songs, though sometimes dismissed as simple pop, resonated deeply, even with those who initially brushed them off. Dancing Queen wasn't just a dance hit, it was an anthem for liberation, a song that gave people permission to let loose and celebrate life. Blondie's music, on the other hand, carried a raw, urban intensity that captured the restless energy of the city. Songs like Call Maine and Rapture didn't just tell stories, they created worlds. For Blondie, music was a form of rebellion, a way to say, we don't need to fit in. ABBA's message was one of inclusivity, a reminder that joy has a place in everyone's life. Yet both bands, in their own styles, brought people together, proving that great music doesn't fit into neat categories. In many ways, Blondie and ABBA offered two visions of pop's future. Blondie paved the way for artists who embraced genre blending and reinvention. Their legacy inspired future icons like Madonna, who built a career on constant transformation, and Lady Gaga, who defied pop norms with fearless experimentation. Blondie proved that pop could be as rebellious and dynamic as punk. Meanwhile, ABBA's influence extended to artists who cherished melody and structure. Madonna's later work, the Spice Girls, and even Adele carried traces of ABBA's passion for songwriting precision. ABBA's songs taught generations of artists that simplicity, when done masterfully, could be just as powerful as innovation. While Blondie leaned into chaos and risk, ABBA showed that careful craftsmanship had its own magic. For Debbie Harry, ABBA was a reminder of what pop could achieve, even when the sound was worlds apart from Blondie's. She often spoke of her admiration for the Swedish band, acknowledging that Blondie wouldn't have been the same without the success of bands like ABBA. Blondie's rebellious edge was sharpened by knowing that another band could be both mainstream and true to their vision. She saw in ABBA a band that, although stylistically different, shared a dedication to authenticity, showing that great music, whether polished or punk, could leave a lasting mark. Today, Debbie Harry still speaks of ABBA with admiration, seeing them as pioneers of a different kind. The world celebrates both Blondie and ABBA for what they gave to music. Blondie as the soundtrack to those who walked on the edge, and ABBA as the uplifting sound of carefree celebration. Blondie and ABBA may have started as opposites, but they have ended up as two sides of the same coin, each proving that music's power lies in its ability to connect. Their legacies show that while music can come from different worlds, it reaches the same place in the end: our hearts.